My name is Steve, clinical educator here at Town and Country Compounding. And we got Viral here, the head honcho at Town and Country Compounding. That's the official title, I
I
believe.
guess you could call it that, yeah.
So this video is going to be about clinical trials. So many people are actually not even aware that compounding pharmacies have any role having to do with clinical trials. Why are we doing clinical trials? So what is going on here?
So when people think of clinical trials, they think of like the big scale, experiments, I guess that, if you will,
The
these
billion
companies do.
dollar clinical trials. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, that they do with this large population of patients when the drug is finally developed, and anything in the media when you think about clinical trials is, that experimental treatment that somebody's getting. There's a lot of work that's done before you get to that point. So some people know there's multiple phases to clinical trials, and where we come in, we are a accredited facility in both sterile and non-sterile compounding, and we follow all of the new regulations that USP enforce. And so that allows us to get into the space when you have the early phase trials, because you're really kind of like experimenting with the actual chemical, if
Right.
you will. You don't have this finished product. And a lot of the trials that we do is a lot of formulation development, engineering runs where we have this concept of this drug in this form, make it happen.
Right.
There's a lot of testing involved. There's a lot of dry runs. There's a lot of wet runs where, figuring out that this is more stable in, a particular diluent, or this is more stable in this space. And so, there's a lot of that pre-work that you have to do. And, a big pharmaceutical company or a manufacturer doesn't really get into that. Those companies really just take the finished formula, if you will, and then mass produce. But there's a lot of research, trial and error, lab work that's done, and compounding pharmacy like ourselves get into that space where we just trying to make something from nothing, really.
Got it. Dry run, wet run. What's that?
So dry run, wet run. Dry run is your conceptual, process, if you will.
Yeah, you haven't
Doing
actually
the
touched the drug yet.
Yeah, you're just kind of doing the compatibility when it comes to, like, from a research standpoint, your salt conversions, your maximum, dilutions, and what your pH might have to be. And then a wet run is like we actually get in the lab from our theoretical formula, try it out and see what happens, and then maybe get it tested. So,
Wow.
there's a lot of research involved. And a lot of people think, like, here, I want to make an eye drop out of this powder, make it go happen. There's a lot of things that come into play before we can just go into the lab and like work with something, especially like a brand new drug or repurposing a drug that's only been used a certain way. There's a lot of theoretical and physical, experimenting that goes on.
Got it. So it's almost like it's almost like a rental lab for a pharmaceutical company, but they get that intellectual service as well of doing all that nerdy work. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we always take away something from it. We always learn something about it, even if it's not. We never see the drug again. We learn about a process. We learn about a concept. We learn about a disease that can be, open to a new form of treatment. So there's a lot of takeaways, and in the clinical trial space, not everything comes to fruition. Things get dropped. Funds get canceled. Realizations occur where, hey, this is just not possible. Very few times, but it's a thing.
Right.
We take away something from every single experience.
Yeah, absolutely. What types of companies do we work with?
All the above. When you look at clinical trials, you have several entities that are involved, and any single part of the process has reached out to us in the past. So you have CROs,
CR what?
clinical research organization.
Oh,
So,
wow.
they're the ones that are kind of like the in betweens between the pharmaceutical company or the primary investigator, and essentially anything and everything that leads to the execution.
Got it.
We work with them. We work with the actual pharmaceutical companies that have a product and want to, turn it into something else. We work with the actual clinical sites. They have the trial lined up. They need somebody to actually make the product for the actual experiments, or trials, or anything going to the patient or subjects. So it kind of is from all angles. And one of the things I realized in working with several trials, there's so many people involved, and we're just a portion of it, but it's not as simple as what you've learned in the past, where you have a pharmaceutical company, you have the hospital that they do the research at, and you have the test patients. There's so many things involved.
Got it. And what is a big surprise that you found when people contact you for clinical trials or just the process of clinical trials? Just doing this for a while now. Like, what are you surprised about?
The fact that there's so many, or rather, I should say, the fact that there's very few options out there. You know, I know my compounding career started way before all of these regulations, and in the past, in the early 2000s, you can do whatever you want in the back counter of your pharmacy. So many things got more strict. All of these regulations came out with it for a good reason. Unfortunately, whatever happened in New England that caused this, it's unfortunate. But the takeaway was that there's certain levels of quality that you should have when compounding for patient safety at the end of the day. And the fact that a lot of people are getting out of the business because of all the regulatory requirements, besides following stricter rules, it costs money to update your facilities and get the newest equipment and service that equipment and make sure everything is running the way it should. It was surprising how many people were just opting out of becoming current with the regulations.
Yeah, it's not worth it. So, what are some things that you help the clients with? Like, what kind of uh, services or products are we like making? Like, what are we doing? These types of projects.
We do a lot of new use, new indications. So certain medications that are only available a particular type of way, we're finding new uses for them, but that requires changing the dosage form. We have been making ophthalmics a lot. That's a new space that a lot of people are getting into. Like a lot of companies, rather, I should say, are researching. So new drugs or your conventional drugs that you've seen for a long time, but in an ophthalmic form. We've done like investigational treatments for just meds that don't even exist yet. So it's kind of all across the board, both sterile, non-sterile, ophthalmic, intravenous, oral, all over the place. There's a new indication for everything, and there's new diseases that come out. So it's kind of just been a broad spectrum.
Got it. And crazy question: you don't work with companies outside of the country, right?
We do. Absolutely, we do. That's where the
Whoa.
chemicals come from half the time.
Oh, whoa.
It's funny, it's a lot of people that are based out of the US do contact us for several reasons, but a big one that's been a common denominator for these companies is the fact that not all countries are regulated the same. And so it's hard to find a facility local to that country that has the accreditations, that has the inspections, that have that minimum standard of operations, and nothing against the organizations that govern those countries, but they're just not as strict. And when you're talking about the FDA, when you're talking about other regulatory boards, you kind of need the or rather most strict policies enforced. And so that's why a lot of companies reach out to us because of our accreditations, because of our minimum requirements when it comes to the regulatory standpoint. So some labs are just not capable of doing
Yeah.
that minimum quality standard in some other countries.
Wow. That's crazy. That's nuts. Last question. Let's talk about your staff here. How are they all involved in this clinical trial process?
I mean, as we talked about the process earlier, there's so many steps involved. There's so many parties, and we have several individuals here that have been trained to uphold the most strictest requirements. And so, whether it comes to USP, whether it comes to CGMP, we're a 503A facility, but when we need to for these trials, we follow CGMP, and all of our staff is trained in their particular aspects of the whole process. I myself was certified in GXP training, and so there's several people involved, both pharmacists, technicians, executive administrator, on all parts of the process to make sure we're following not only the regulatory requirements, but we're following for each trial specific requirements, because one thing I found working with several different organizations, everybody has their own little approved study protocol, and those study protocols don't match
Right.
each other at all
Right.
You know, so being able to just be completely familiar with the regulatory requirements helps across the board, regardless of which trial we're working on.
Got it. And one extra question, I guess, that's an advantage for some doctors to work with us as well, because we've gotten some of our doctors some clinical trials because of our connections. So that's nice, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've had a couple prescribers that we've been working with, and they through their experience, they realize they can become a primary investigator for something that they've been working on. And the primary investigator is usually always a prescriber, and we've had a few that, because of our longstanding history, decided to work with us for an experimental treatment as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you for going viral with viral
Thank you, Steve.